often on trumped-up charges, the Soviet Union purged its own citizenry by killing 700,000 people during the Great Terror of the late 1930s. To put into perspective how large that number is, I'm seated on a floor that contains 700,000 bullet shell casings, and I don't know how deep this floor is. Hi, I'm Matt, and welcome to another edition of Borders on Budgets. On this episode, we are at the Gulag Museum in Moscow, Russia, to experience how the USSR subjugated its population with fear and repression.
Hi, I'm Matt, and welcome to this pack of matches, and thank you very much for tuning in.
Seems like this should be on the Blair Witch.
Next episode. A reminder, Borders on Budgets.
The Gulag Museum opens with a dark, eerie exhibit encompassing a series of doors. These portals have been salvaged and preserved as artifacts from local jails and Soviet gulags from decades past. Though this isn't a hands-on display to look at the rusting iron bars and the disfigured wood suggests these gateways have seen hard times. At door number 2, which dates back to the 1940s, one of the Gulag prisoners described his conditions as a stone building with heavily fortified doors and a slop pail in his cell. After the Russian Revolution of 1917, the judicial system was abolished. The Soviet Penal Code, which came into existence in 1922 under the leadership of Vladimir Lenin, expanded the state's ability to punish its citizens with harsher sentences, including death. This display of red string shows the web of repression and arbitrariness citizens faced with the Soviet Union and its governing method of communism. Enemies of the nation hinder the creation of a just society. Forced labor is the way to build socialism. The Soviet authority relies on force, not law. This is the crux of the ideology behind the far left and the communist movement of the 1920s. With an ever-expanding Soviet state suppressing its population, show trials were additional tactics to scare the population, especially when high-ranking members of society, professionals, scientists, and the wealthy were jailed. It meant nobody in the USSR was safe from arbitrary purges. With the Communist Party seizing and maintaining control of the Soviet Union and jailing its activists, dissidents, and others who were deemed politically dangerous, there was a growing Gulag population. By the 1930s, the numbers were exceeding over 200,000. With this vast quantity of people in the country's northern and Siberian territories, the country underwent large-scale forced labor projects. One such project was the construction of the White Sea and the Baltic Canal. Spanning 227 kilometers, this project was completed in less than 2 years. Never mind that over 12,000 people were killed in the making of the canal. This was done for the good of the state. Relying on imprisoned workers and forced labor as the Soviet Union was industrializing, the Gulag population swelled during the 1930s from 200,000 to 1.5 million just before Germany invaded the USSR in 1941. In order to prosecute tens and hundreds of thousands eventually condemned to the Gulag, dvoikas and troikas, 2- and 3-person committees were responsible for the sentencing. It was not unusual for hundreds and thousands to be prosecuted at just one sitting at one time. After the Second World War, or the Great Patriotic War as it's known in Russia, the country had to significantly rebuild. With 600,000 prisoners in the Gulag system in 1946, that number almost tripled to 1.7 million by the time Stalin died, and then eventually gulags were starting to be phased out through the late 50s. If the Gulag Museum started with eerie prison doors, the tour concludes with poignant, staggering numbers. In a 27-year period, 20 million Soviets endured the Gulag, 5 million of whom were deemed to be political prisoners. Mortality was 10%. This has been another edition of Borders on Budgets. A reminder, Borders on Budgets, long-distance hikes, slices of life, not a lot of money. From the Gulag Museum in Moscow, Russia, thank you for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.
Tunnel! It's a tunnel! Oh, how neat! Woo, woo!
Studies later showed the ineffectiveness of forced labor. Not only would workers have been more productive had they been paid, but the costs to the state would have been far less than having had to operate a Gulag system. Did you find this story informative or helpful? Good. Help Borders on Budgets grow. Hit the subscribe button below, and don't forget to share this story with your friends who would like to learn about Soviet history.